Hey there, folks. So this week we're going to see kind of layers and selections in action, how we can use those to do all sorts of neat stuff. In this case, we're going to create a photo composite, which is basically one image that is in reality a combination of a bunch of images. So I've got the four images from this week open. I have blue sky, desert, skyline, and hot air balloon. All right, now it's a good just rule of thumb, just general practice to create a working file that you bring all your images into. Now we could use one of these as the basis for our working file, but the reason I say it's good to create your own is because you never really know what an image color mode or resolution is, and sometimes if you don't create your own image, you might forget to check those things. For example, this image is 300 pixels per inch, 9 inches wide, so that's not bad. For example, if we go to the next one, though, and go to image size, it is 33 inches wide at 72 pixels per inch. Now, that's roughly, not a huge difference if we were to convert this to 300 pixels. You'll see it's 8 inches wide. So it's similar, but if we're creating something for high or low res based on print or screen, it's good to just have create our own working file so we can dictate that. So I'm going to go to File, New, and I'm going to create this in inches. We'll say 8 by 5, and we'll make it 300 pixels per inch. RGB color is fine. Since if we were creating this for print, we would want to change this to CMYK. But since we're going to be submitting this online, we'll go ahead and leave it RGB. So we'll click OK. Now this is going to be our working document. All right. So the first thing I want to do is bring in my sky. So I'm going to go to blue sky, and I'm not going to worry about making any selections. I'm just going to get my move tool, click on the whole image, hold down, drag it up to Untitled 1, drag it down, and let go. All right, so I get my sky. You'll see over here in the layers panel, we have layer 1, which we'll go ahead and double click and name sky. And I can move it around. You'll see it's actually a little bigger than the image frame, but that's good because it gives us a little room to move things around. All right, so the next thing I want to do is bring my foreground in. So I'm going to go to desert, and in this case, the foreground is pretty busy. So if I got the quick selection tool and I just started dragging around, it would give it to me eventually, but there's a lot of different contrast going on. In this case, I'm going to Command D to deselect, or Control D. In this case, it's a little easier to select what we don't want, because the sky is a relatively flat color and it's kind of overexposed, which is why we are using a different sky to begin with. So in this case, I'm going to use my quick selection tool, and I'm just going to click and drag and paint over the sky, and you'll see just by dragging once, I get a pretty good selection of the sky. You see the marching ants going all the way around the top. Now to flip that and get what I actually want to be selected, I just go to inverse. So I go to select, down to inverse, and you'll see the marching ants switch, and now they're going around the bottom. So what I have selected is what I want. Now I can get my move tool, bring my cursor inside the selection so you get the little scissor icon on your cursor, and then click and drag up to Untitled 1, wait for it to switch over, drag down and release your mouse button, and now you have a foreground. All right, now we can free transform this a little bit to make it fit the whole, it actually does fit the whole width, but I want to make it a little bit bigger. So I'm going to Command T or Control T to get that free transform bounding box. Hold down Shift, then click on a corner, drag it out a little bit. And the only reason I'm doing this is just so I have a little bit of flexibility in the positioning of things. All right. So then I'll double click inside that box or hit the check mark at the top and apply it. I'm going to position this in the bottom third of the document rather than putting it halfway up in the middle, that kind of stuff. That's just a compositional technique called the rule of thirds you can look into. But it generally makes for a more pleasing visual, for a more pleasing photograph. So I have this the way I want it. Now, there is a command, because occasionally when you bring in an image onto a different colored background, you get what's called a kind of a halo. It's a fringe effect. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. If you look right here on the edges, you get a little bit of that white sky from the other image. And that's just, it can be distracting. You can see it all the way around. That can be distracting when you're trying to create a realistic photo composite. Quick fix for that is to use the defringe command. So to do that, we're going to go up to Layer, It's kind of hidden. So you go to Layer, down to Matting, and then Defringe. All right, so when you click that, it's going to ask how many pixels. You can do 1 or 2 pixels. We'll try 2, see how it looks. Click OK, and it gets rid of most of that defringing. You can see there's a little bit here and there, but I bet whenever we zoom out, it's not going to be very noticeable. That looks pretty good. All right, now's a good time to go ahead and save our file. You want to save early and often. So you go Command S for File Save, and I'm going to name this I don't know, Desert Composition. All right, name it and save the PSD file. Leave it on Photoshop. Save that to your desktop, your flash drive, wherever you store files for this class. Click Save, and then we're going to, when we get done, save a JPEG copy that will turn into Blackboard. All right, so we have Sky over here in our Layers panel. We have Layer 1, which we'll go ahead and double-click and rename Desert. All right, just a good habit to get in the habit of naming your layers descriptively. So now we can close this blue sky. We can close Desert, wherever that is. Over here we can close this. So just to kind of, so we don't have quite so many files open. Now you can click on Sky in your Desert Composition file and sort of move it around to get the effect that you want. You don't want that green grass to show through because that's going to be a dead giveaway that we are faking this, this scene. But just kind of look at the clouds and how they relate to the foreground. It's all about tricking the eye and making it seem like it's a real scene, whether it is or not. That looks pretty good to me. So the next thing I'm going to do is bring in a hot air balloon. All right, now this, again, the subject is actually a little busier than the background. So the technique that I'm going to use is that select inverse technique. So I'm going to get my quick selection tool and just kind of click around and drag around the background until I get my selection. And that looks pretty good. Now I want to select inverse so I don't have the background selected, because right now if I went to move this, you'll see I'm actually moving the background. That's not what I want. So I'll go to select inverse, and you'll see the marching ants disappear from around the outside of the object. Now there's one more thing I want to show you before we bring this over. If I zoom in and zoom down here, you're going to see this selection is not 100% accurate. We have some blue areas in here. And now this isn't going to make a big difference because we're actually bringing it over onto a blue background. But if you need to fine-tune small areas of your selection, there's a feature called Quick Mask Mode that we can work in. And that actually allows you to paint with the brush your selection, to change the selection. And to show you how this works, we're going to learn more about masks as we go. But for now, we're just going to click on this icon. It's a dotted circle inside a square. It's underneath your foreground and background color. And that's going to put us into what's called Quick Mask Mode. When that happens, you're going to see the background turn pink. And you're probably wondering, why in the world did this happen? Well, it's just the way Photoshop shows you how this works. Basically, whatever is pink is masked, meaning it's not going to be selected. And whatever is visible that's not pink will be selected. So when we're in this mode, we can actually click the paintbrush on your tools panel and then adjust the brush size and the hardness. In this case, we want a pretty small brush. I'm going to say like 7 or 8 pixels. And then the hardness, we want to be relatively hard. That's just how fuzzy the edge of the brush is. When it's 100%, it's really sharp. When it's at 0, it's really soft. And then when I start painting, you're going to see the part that I paint turn pink. What this means is that I'm actually subtracting it from my selection. So I can paint a little bit. We don't have to be too precise because, like I said, we're just dealing in... I just want to show you how this tool works. So I'm going to click around and paint a little bit of this blue section. Now what I'm doing, if you're not getting that same thing, look at your foreground and background color. Whenever we went into quick mask mode, it went from whatever colors they were to black and white. Black is masking, meaning we're actually subtracting from the selection. And this will make more sense the further we get into using masks and things like that. But for now, just know that black is going to subtract from your selection and white is going to add to it. For example, if I click to get us out of quick mask mode, you'll see that our selection has changed. All All right, we've subtracted this part from our selection. If I get my move tool and move, we're now moving the hot air balloon, but not that blue background. All right, so let's go back into quick mask mode. So if black is subtracting from our selection and masking certain areas, then white is going to do the opposite. So if you click this little crooked arrow to switch our foreground and background colors, now we're actually adding to our selection. It's kind of confusing, I know, but it's an important concept to understand, so I want to go ahead and introduce it to you now before we get into layer masks. So if I switch and get white, now I can kind of paint over this side of the hot air balloon that was kind of lost in our selection to add it back. All right, so just so you have an idea of how that works, we don't have to worry about these little lines or anything. That looks pretty good. So I will click the quick mask icon to get us out of quick mask mode. So we have our selection now. We can zoom out, and now we can get our move tool, click on our hot air balloon, drag it to our desert composition, wait for it to switch over, click and drag down. Now that is a big balloon, so we will free transform. You can go edit, free transform, or Command T or Control T is the shortcut. Either one, depending on a macro PC. Hold down Shift before you click, then click and grab a corner so you can strain the proportions. Let go of your mouse before you let go of Shift, and that's going to ensure that you don't get a balloon that looks like this or this. All right. Hold down Shift, drag it, and this is really all about creating the illusion of depth. So I'm going to have this guy in the foreground, so I'm going to make him relatively large. I might even crop him off of the image a little bit, just to add to that sense that this is a real scene. If everything is contained in the image frame, it kind of seems like maybe this could be faked. But I want to try and make this look real, or as real as possible. So I might, it's all about resizing, moving things around to kind of create this illusion of reality and depth. That looks pretty good to me. So I'll double click to apply it. Now to make this even to take this illusion even further, I want to create another one and make it look like it's further away from us. So with this layer selected, and we can name it Balloon 1, I'm going to duplicate this layer. To do that, with it selected, you just go to Layer, Duplicate Layer, and it'll say, what do you want to name it? And we'll name the copy Balloon 2, and click OK. And you'll see it appear in the Layers panel. It's actually right above the other balloon. So if you click and drag, you're going to see that we've created these two. And it's behind our desert layer, which is good because that can actually add to our sense of depth. So I'm going to free transform this layer and shrink it down, hold down Shift again. And the smaller that it gets, the further in the background it's going to appear. All right, so kind of up to you how you want to do that. And every time I do this project, it looks a little different because of the way I position elements. And you can try overlapping it to make it look, to add to that sense of depth, or you can just kind of put it a little closer to the foreground, or I'm sorry, a little closer to the ground, make it a little smaller. Now there's one other thing we can kind of do to trick the eye, and that is there's something called atmospheric perspective, which basically means that the further away something is, the lighter it appears because of all the dust particles in the air. If you see this area of the desert, it looks lighter than this part up here because there's dust particles in the air, and it's just an atmospheric phenomenon. So to achieve that effect on this balloon, make it look like it's further away, we can kind of fake it by taking down the saturation of these colors. So I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, and Levels, not Hue Saturation this time. This is just a different effect. I'm going to click on Levels, and this is called a histogram. We're going to get into this later, but for now, just take the output level slider that's black over here on the left. We're going to drag it slightly to the right, and you'll see that that image gets lighter. Now, if we took it all the way over, it'd be white, and vice versa. If we did the opposite thing, we'd make it black. So you can make silhouettes this way as well. But in this case, we're just going to drag it a little bit to the left. I'm going to kind of look at it. That looks pretty good. You want it to be subtle. It's all about subtlety. So I took mine to about 42 for this black output slider. Click OK, and now my balloon 2 looks like it's in the background a little bit. So that's pretty good. File save. Very last thing I want to do is bring in this skyline. Now, I'm not concerned with all this stuff down here. I just want the upper part, these buildings, okay? So again, this is pretty busy, so I'm going to see if I can make a selection with the quick selection tool. You always want to start with the easiest selection tool and go from there. If it doesn't work, you go to the next level of difficulty and so on, until you get to the pin tool, which you're going to be learning about in the next assignment. So I'm going to click and drag over the sky, and you'll see that it gets a little crazy, it gets a little too much. So then I can hit Option or click on this Subtract from Selection and drag over the parts that it got that I didn't want it to. And over here, it's not bad. I'm not going to worry about this building over here. I just want these big buildings. So that's pretty good. Now, there's some stuff that we're missing here. I'm going to try the Refine Edge tool and see if that does a good job of fixing this. So I'll click on Refine Edge, and you'll see my selection is not looking so good. There's some bits that we're missing. And so I'm just going to click and drag over some of these edges, like these trees right here, and you'll see it does a much better job. If you zoom in, a much better job selecting the edges of those trees. So I'll just kind of paint around the edges here. Looking for problems, like right here. See if it fixes those. Not so much, but that's okay. Gets that pretty well. Paint over this, gets that. All right, so that's not, I did not really like what it did, so I'm gonna Command Z to undo that. And then I'll click OK. So, it's not an exact selection, but it's kind of, for what I'm going for, it's going to work, because this is going to be a relatively small element in the background. So now, if you notice, I still have the sky selected. All right, if you see the marching ants going around, that's not what I want. So I'm going to go to Select Inverse, get the foreground selected, and now I'm going to bring my cursor inside the selection, click, drag up to my composition, drag down, and let go. All right, now that's obviously not exactly where I want it to be. But that's okay. So I'm going to free transform, Command T or Control T, and shrink it down a bit and kind of place it right on top of this hill. So it looks like my desert city, my mountaintop city. All right. And don't worry about this little guy. We're going to get rid of him in just a second. I'm just looking at the placement of these buildings. That looks pretty good to me. So I'll double click to apply it. Now for this, non-destructive editing would create a layer mask. We'll get into that. For now, we'll be destructive. And I'm going to grab my eraser tool, which looks like an old school eraser. Click on it. Just like a brush, you can adjust the hardness and the size. I have mine at 100% hardness, 62 pixels wide. That's good enough. I'm going to just erase this part of this layer that I don't want. All right, and you'll see it disappears. Get your move tool. You can also use the arrow tools to kind of fine-tune the placement. That looks pretty good. If you want to flip the way the city looks, you can actually go to Image, where is it? Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal, and you'll see it actually flips. But in this case, looking at the lighting is not really what I want in that particular way. So I'm going to Command Z to undo. So you always want to pay attention to your light source, and it's kind of unidirectional here, but in this case, you can kind of see the light source. So it's not a precise match for light sources, but it's good enough for what we're trying to do. So there you go. That's your first photo composite composition in Photoshop. So make sure to save, and then when you're done, you go to Save As, and save this as a JPEG copy. Choose where you want to save it. And then wait for this, and then you can adjust the quality. This 1013K is basically 1 megabyte. So that's plenty small for submitting to Blackboard, so that's okay. And there you go. Turn that into Blackboard.